I've lived through that phase of life where the heart no longer beats for love, it beats for rage. Every pulse feels like thunder trapped beneath the ribs, a storm waiting to tear through flesh and bone. The world around me kept spinning, bright and loud, but inside me, it was silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, no, the heavy kind, the one that presses against your chest until breathing feels like a chore. I remember those nights when the walls stared back at me, when I could hear the hum of my own heartbeat echoing in the dark like a warning. I smiled when people looked, because that's what men are taught to do. We don't break in public, we just fold in private. I laughed at jokes that didn't land, nodded at conversations I wasn't really part of, and played the role of a man who had everything under control. But control is a fragile illusion, isn't it? It slips the moment you stop pretending. I used to think silence meant strength, that the quieter I stayed, the tougher I looked. But silence, real silence, it eats you from the inside out. It grows roots in your thoughts, vines that crawl through your memories, wrapping themselves around every word you never said, every scream you buried under pride. And with time, you start to forget what your own voice sounds like. You start to disappear behind the version of yourself the world wants to see. That's the cruelest kind of death, the slow fading of your own truth. So I stood there, day after day, breathing in anger and exhaling denial, convincing myself this was what manhood looked like. But deep down, I knew I wasn't living. I was just surviving in silence. Those were the days when pain became my closest companion. I carried it like a secret crown, unseen but always heavy. Every scar on my skin, every ache in my chest felt like proof that I was still standing, still fighting, even if I no longer knew what for. I wore my suffering like armor, mistaking numbness for strength. I told myself I was winning because I could endure more than others, because I could smile through the ache and pretend I didn't feel it. But deep down, the fire was spreading, burning everything that was once soft inside me. I didn't realize that in trying to be untouchable, I had become hollow. The nights were the worst. That's when the fire whispered the loudest. Anger would crawl up from places I didn't even know existed. I would replay every betrayal, every word that cut too deep, and feed on it like fuel. I thought revenge was healing. I thought hate was power. But both are just different names for the same kind of poison. I was drowning in it, smiling through the flames, convincing myself it was light. People saw confidence, they didn't see the smoke curling behind my eyes. They saw a man moving forward, but not the pieces of him that fell behind each step. I became addicted to that burning, it made me feel alive in a twisted way. The pain became purpose. Without it, I felt empty, invisible. So I clung to it, even as it tore me apart. And the cruelest part? I didn't want it to stop. Because when the fire goes out, all that's left is the silence. And in that silence, I'd have to face the truth that the strength I was proud of was just another way to hide the pain I never healed. One morning, after another sleepless night, I found myself staring into the mirror longer than usual. The reflection staring back didn't look like me anymore. His eyes were tired, not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, but the kind that comes from fighting invisible battles every single day. I leaned closer, trying to recognize the person I used to be, but all I saw was someone I didn't know. The fire in my chest had turned to ashes, and the silence had grown teeth. It began to whisper questions I had spent years avoiding. "Who are you trying to punish?" it asked. My hands trembled, my throat went dry. The answer was supposed to be simple: them, the people who left, the ones who lied, the ones who took pieces of me and never looked back. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. I wasn't punishing them. I was punishing myself for trusting, for feeling, for caring too much. I was angry at my own heart for still beating with love for the people who hurt me. Every time I looked into that mirror, it felt like I was looking into my own courtroom. I was both the accused and the judge, sentencing myself to suffer for crimes I didn't commit. The mirror doesn't lie. It reflects what you can't say out loud. And in that stillness, I realized how far I had fallen, not into darkness, but into denial. I had built my own prison, one made of pride and silence. I wasn't living in the shadow of betrayal anymore, I was living in the shadow of who I used to be. And that realization, that quiet truth, broke me in a way no one else ever could. The real prison was never built by their betrayal, it was crafted inside my own mind, brick by brick, thought by thought. I carried invisible chains everywhere I went, forged from the lies I had been taught to believe. Men don't cry. Men don't need love. Men must win, no matter the cost. These weren't lessons, they were cages, disguised as pride. I wore them like badges of honor, never realizing they were shackles tightening around my soul. Every time I felt the urge to break down, I swallowed it whole, locking it deep inside where no one could see. I told myself I was being strong, but strength without truth is just another kind of weakness. There were days when I could feel the weight of those lies pressing on my chest, heavier than any heartbreak I'd ever known. I'd sit in silence, pretending to be unbothered, pretending that nothing could touch me. But the truth was, I was suffocating. The mask I wore to look powerful had become a second skin, and I didn't know how to take it off. The world clapped for my composure, admired my calm, and called it discipline, but no one noticed the storm quietly raging underneath. I started to see how deeply the poison had spread. Every thought, every action was driven by the need to prove something, to others, to myself, to a version of manhood that was never real. I wasn't living, I was performing. Every breath was a rehearsal for the illusion of control. And maybe that's the cruelest kind of prison, the one where the door is open, but you're too afraid to walk out, because freedom means facing the feelings you've buried alive. There was one night that still haunts me. The air was heavy, the kind of darkness that feels alive, like it's watching you, waiting for you to break. I remember sitting alone, staring at the same four walls that had witnessed my quiet destruction. I could hear the hum of the city outside, the world moving on, but inside my room time stood still. My thoughts were louder than any noise I'd ever heard. Every memory played on repeat, every betrayal, every mistake, every word I never said. I tried to distract myself, to drown it out with anything I could find, but silence always came back stronger. And that night, for the first time, I couldn't run from it. I felt something inside me snap, not violently, but quietly, like a thread giving up after being pulled too long. I whispered to myself, I am not okay. Just 4 words, but they shattered everything I had built around me. The armor, the pride, the illusion, all of it cracked under the weight of that truth. For years I had convinced myself that admitting pain was weakness, but in that moment, it felt like the bravest thing I had ever done. Tears came, not loud, not dramatic, just slow and steady, like my soul was finally exhaling. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't pretending. I was simply human. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing. Because healing doesn't begin with hope or forgiveness. It begins with honesty, with the courage to look at your reflection and say, I'm broken. That night didn't fix me, but it woke me. It made me realize that survival isn't strength. Healing is. And the first step to healing is finally telling the truth. Healing isn't a gentle journey, it's a battlefield. Every morning feels like waking up to another war inside your own head. You fight thoughts that tell you you're not enough, memories that refuse to fade, and emotions that twist themselves into weapons. There's no map, no mercy, no finish line. Just an endless cycle of falling apart and trying to rebuild before the day ends. I used to think healing meant peace, that one day everything would feel light again. But the truth is, healing is chaos disguised as growth. It's ugly, it's exhausting, and it hurts in ways you can't explain. Some days I wake up and feel strong, like I'm finally getting better. I breathe deeply, I move with purpose, and for a moment, I believe I've conquered it. But then, out of nowhere, the shadows return. The same memories, the same doubts, creeping in like old ghosts. That's when I realize healing isn't about erasing the pain. It's about learning how to live with it, how to look at your scars and not flinch anymore. It's about standing in the wreckage of who you were and choosing to build again, even when your hands are still bleeding. I fall often, more times than I can count. Some days I don't even rise fully, I just crawl forward. But even crawling is progress. Every stumble, every tear, every small act of trying counts. Because healing isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. It's about forgiving yourself when you fall, about showing up even when the weight feels unbearable. And maybe, just maybe, it's about realizing that the war never really ends, you just get stronger, wiser, and a little less afraid to fight it again tomorrow. Growth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or applause. It creeps in quietly, in the spaces between the chaos and the stillness, in the moments when you least expect it. I started noticing it in the way I carried myself, the subtle shift in how I walked into rooms, how I spoke, how I no longer felt the need to explain every thought or justify every emotion. The world didn't suddenly change, but I did. And that made all the difference. I began to see that the pain I had endured wasn't a punishment, it was the foundation of something stronger, a raw material I could mold into resilience, into clarity, into purpose. Every day became a lesson in self-mastery. I learned to measure my value by the way I treated myself, not by the validation I received from others. I learned that boundaries weren't walls to keep people out, but shields to protect my peace. I started noticing the people and the experiences that added weight to my life versus those that siphoned it away. Growth demanded honesty. Brutal, uncomfortable honesty. I had to face my own flaws, my weaknesses, my moments of compromise where I gave too much, tolerated too much, and silenced myself for the sake of acceptance. Confronting these truths wasn't easy. Some mornings I felt like a stranger in my own skin, but each confrontation peeled back another layer of fear and uncertainty. And slowly, imperceptibly, I began to reclaim my power. Not the power over others, but the power over myself. I began to act instead of react, to create instead of chase, to lead instead of plead. The version of me that had been lost in silence and approval started to emerge, stronger, steadier, undeniable. Growth isn't a destination, it's a constant becoming, a daily choice to rise above what once held you down, to keep building the man you were always meant to be. Strength became less about impressing others and more about mastering myself. I realized that true power wasn't measured by who noticed me or who followed my lead, but by the quiet certainty that I no longer needed validation from anyone. Every action, every choice, every thought became a test of my own integrity. I started asking myself the hard questions: am I living for others, or for myself? Am I giving my energy to chaos, or am I protecting the calm I fought so hard to build? These weren't easy questions to answer. The truth often cut deeper than any insult, rejection, or heartbreak ever could. I had to face the reality that much of my previous suffering wasn't caused by others, it was caused by my own surrender, my own compromises, my own willingness to place someone else's approval above my peace. Once that realization sank in, everything shifted. I stopped chasing what wasn't meant for me and redirected my energy toward creation instead of reaction. I built routines, cultivated discipline, strengthened my body, sharpened my mind, and clarified my purpose. Every small victory became proof that I was no longer defined by the past. I stopped explaining myself, stopped apologizing for my presence, and stopped begging for attention that was never earned. That liberation carried weight, and the world began to notice, not because I demanded attention, but because my energy had changed. I became magnetic in ways I couldn't have imagined before. People, opportunities, and experiences that once felt distant now gravitated toward me naturally. I realized that strength isn't about dominance over others, it's about dominion over yourself. And when a man commands himself with unwavering clarity, he radiates a power that cannot be ignored, a presence that invites respect rather than demands it. This is the point where transformation isn't visible in words or gestures, it's felt in the quiet gravity of someone who has reclaimed themselves fully, unshakable, untouchable, and undeniably whole. Freedom arrived not with a roar, but in silence. It was the quiet mornings when I woke without dread, when my thoughts no longer circled the chaos of the past, when I could breathe without the weight of another's expectations pressing down on me. I realized that everything I had lost, every relationship, every trust, every fleeting moment of attention, had been a lesson, a forced initiation into a version of myself I had neglected for far too long. I no longer feared being alone because I had discovered the power in solitude. I no longer sought approval because I had learned that respect begins from within. Every memory of pain now served as a mirror, reflecting not weakness, but resilience. The heartbreak that once consumed me became the soil in which my strength grew. I walked differently, moved differently, spoke differently, not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. My energy shifted from seeking validation to radiating presence. People felt it. Women felt it. But it was never about them anymore, it was about me, about my peace, my purpose, my unwavering center. I no longer chased affection, I attracted it effortlessly, not because I was desirable in the conventional sense, but because I was whole, unbroken, and fully myself. The irony of it all struck me clearly: the woman who once disrespected me, the chaos that once consumed me, the silence I once feared, they all became catalysts for my evolution. I had become untouchable, not by building walls, but by breaking free from the illusions that bound me. I realized that love without respect is hollow, that validation from others is temporary, and that real power lies in self-mastery. Now, when I reflect on the past, I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the heartbreak, for the disrespect, for the absence that once felt unbearable. Each loss was a teacher, each tear a guide, each silence a doorway to freedom. I had stopped chasing life and started commanding it, not with force, but with presence. And in that stillness, I finally understood what it truly means to be untouchable, unshaken, and wholly free.